Sarah was looking forward to the little getaway she had planned. In her 7th month of pregnancy, she felt the need for some time to herself, away from the city and the stressful routine. Her chosen destination was a small cabin in the woods, a peaceful refuge promised by the advertisement she had found online. Nothing seemed to indicate that the place held any sinister secrets. On arriving at the cabin, Sarah was enchanted by the tranquility of the place. The sound of birds and the smell of wet wood were comforting. She looked around and felt a deep sense of peace. The small hut was surrounded by lush vegetation, and the sun filtered through the treetops, creating a pattern of light and shade on the forest floor. Sarah decided to take advantage of the rest of the afternoon to go for a short walk in the surrounding area. With a sense of curiosity and excitement, she followed a path that meandered through the forest. The path was narrow, lined with tall pines and bushes, and with every step, she felt her connection with nature deepen. The natural beauty of the forest was breathtaking, and Sarah was enchanted by the serenity that surrounded her. As she walked, she allowed herself to get lost in the contemplation of the landscape. The fresh smell of the earth and the gentle sound of leaves swaying in the wind were a breath of fresh air compared to the chaos of urban life. Sarah was grateful for this moment of tranquility, believing that the getaway would be just what she needed to reconnect with herself and the baby she was about to bring into the world. The next morning, Sarah decided to explore the forest in more depth. After a leisurely breakfast at the cabin, she packed a small backpack and followed a trail that looked promising, but which was not included on the map provided by the owner. Curiosity drove her, and the feeling of being alone in the vastness of nature made her feel renewed and alive. The path was narrow and meandered through tall, dense trees. Sarah was fascinated by the diversity of the flora and the sense of peaceful isolation that the trail provided. The sound of leaves being trampled and birdsong were the only accompaniments to her walk. After a while, however, the trail began to disappear. The vegetation became increasingly dense and unexplored. The trees grew closer together, and the path that had once been visible now became a series of natural obstacles. Sarah stopped and tried to assess the situation, but quickly realized that she was moving away from the original path. The trail had turned into an almost invisible path, covered in thick vegetation and vines. With a growing sense of disorientation, Sarah decided to try and return the same way. However, the forest seemed to be changing around her. The sun, which had once illuminated the path with a warm glow, now became weaker and weaker, filtered through the density of the trees. The shadows lengthened, and the environment seemed to close in on her, as if she were entering a natural tunnel formed by the vegetation. Sarah began to feel a slight tightening in her chest, her anxiety growing with the realization that she couldn't find her way back. The trees seemed to move subtly, and the sound of the forest became deeper and more intense. Panic began to set in, and Sarah tried to keep calm as she looked for familiar signs or landmarks that would help her get back on the original trail. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath and trying to concentrate. What had once seemed like a simple exploration was now turning into an unsettling labyrinth, and Sarah couldn't ignore the feeling that something was beginning to unfold around her. Sarah continued to struggle against the growing sense of disorientation as the vegetation around her became denser and denser. The environment seemed to be changing by the minute, and panic was beginning to take hold of her. The sound of her own footsteps seemed muffled and distant, as if the forest was swallowing up her movements. After hours of unsuccessfully trying to get back on the original trail, Sarah spotted a small clearing in the distance. With a sense of relief and hope, she approached, believing that perhaps she could find some sign of help or a familiar landmark. The sun was now very low on the horizon, and the clearing was shrouded in a gloomy darkness. When Sarah entered the clearing, she found something unexpected. In the center, was a small, old, moss-covered hut that looked strangely familiar. The structure was in ruins, with broken windows and fallen doors, but there was something about the hut that made it seem like a shadow of what should have been a cozy refuge. Sarah approached cautiously, her heart beating fast. Hoping to find some clue to the original trail, she entered the hut. The interior was dusty and covered in cobwebs, and the musty smell was strong. In the darkness, Sarah could make out some old furniture and a table with an old, dusty diary on top. She approached the table and picked up the diary, which was covered in dust and seemed to have been forgotten a long time ago. When she opened the diary, she began to read the entries, and her heart raced as she realized that the writings were related to disturbing events. The diary described the forest as a place where people got lost and were never seen again, mentioning ancient rituals and entities that fed on despair and fear. As Sarah read, a feeling of horror came over her. She came across an entry that mentioned a pregnant woman who had lost her way in the forest and never returned. The details were eerily similar to her own situation. The description of the sensations of disorientation and fear were identical to those she was experiencing. Sarah's panic increased when she began to hear a rustling sound coming from outside the hut. The voice was low and indecipherable, but it seemed to be calling her name. She got up, diary still in hand, and left the hut, trying to locate the source of the whispers. When Sarah came out, the clearing was completely different. What had once been a bright, open area was now shrouded in almost total darkness. The surrounding trees seemed to be closing in, and the clearing was gradually being swallowed up by the gloom. The whispers were louder and clearer now, and she recognized the sound as something more sinister than she had imagined. Suddenly, a figure appeared among the shadows. It was a woman in an old dress, her face dark and indistinct, like a stain in the gloom. The woman approached slowly, and Sarah felt a deep fear. The figure was enveloped in an aura of despair and sadness, and her eyes glowed with a supernatural light. Sarah tried to back away, but her feet seemed to be stuck to the ground. The figure approached, and Sarah realized with horror that it was a replica of the woman described in the diary, a figure from the past, trapped in the forest like an echo of the terrible events that had happened there. The woman held out her hand to Sarah, who tried to scream, but no sound came out. Fear and confusion paralyzed her. In a moment of desperation, Sarah remembered the diary and threw it in the direction of the figure, as if that could ward off evil. The woman stopped and looked at the diary with a look of recognition and despair. With a growing, agonizing sound, the figure disappeared into the darkness, and the forest returned to an eerie calm. Sarah, trembling and crying, realized that the clearing was now completely deserted. The figure seemed to have been a manifestation of past events, a desperate attempt to reach someone who could understand the pain and suffering of the one who had been lost. Sarah, now with a new determination, knew she had to find a way out before the forest swallowed her up completely. She moved away from the clearing and began to walk more carefully, guided by the hope that perhaps she could escape the same fate as the woman in the diary. Sarah was exhausted and terrified, but the sight of the figure in the clearing had left a deep mark on her mind. Determined to escape, she turned away from the clearing and continued walking through the forest, her steps careful and silent. The darkness around her seemed to deepen, and her surroundings were now plunged into an oppressive silence, interrupted only by the sound of her own rapid breathing. As she walked, Sarah began to wonder if there was any way out of the forest. The feeling of desperation was building up, and the sensation of being watched wouldn't leave her. She tried to keep calm, but every snap of a twig or rustle in the trees made her heart race. Suddenly, Sarah spotted a point of light in the distance. It was a dim light, but it seemed like hope in the darkness. She headed in the direction of the light, which grew stronger with every step. As she got closer, the light turned out to be a small campfire, surrounded by rocks and under a clearing that appeared to be an abandoned camping area. Sarah approached the fire, which was only partially extinguished. and found some boxes and camping utensils around it. The place was clean and tidy, but there was no sign of people. The campfire seemed to have been used recently, and the absence of any other human being aroused a mixture of hope and apprehension in Sarah. She rummaged through the boxes and found an emergency flashlight, which she gratefully took. Sarah switched on the flashlight and began to illuminate the surrounding area, hoping to find some clue as to how to get out of the forest. As she scanned the area, she found a field map rolled up inside a box. With trembling hands, she unfolded the map and tried to identify its location. The map looked old and partially worn, but Sarah managed to locate the clearing she was in. However, the map didn't show the trail she had followed or any other useful landmarks. Instead, there were several strange symbols and handwritten notations indicating caution and do not go further. As Sarah studied the map, she heard a sound coming from behind one of the trees. The sound was muffled and seemed to be a whispered conversation. Fear returned instantly, and Sarah turned towards the source of the sound. What she saw paralyzed her. Two shadowy, almost invisible figures were moving between the trees. The figures seemed to be in a silent discussion, and Sarah couldn't make out any clear details about who or what they were. She hid behind the boxes, her heart beating fast. The figures approached the fire and stopped, as if they were looking for something. Sarah tried to breathe calmly, avoiding any movement that might attract attention. The figures began to move away, and Sarah, seizing the opportunity, headed in the opposite direction. As she advanced, Sarah found a small hut hidden among the trees. The structure was in better condition than the previous hut, and looked more recent. With a mixture of hope and suspicion, she approached, and looking through the window, saw an unexpected scene. The hut was equipped with a communication radio, a weather station, and a table with various maps and notes. Sarah entered the hut cautiously and approached the table. The notes were full of references to the forest and to various research expeditions. She found a notebook detailing various disappearances and disturbing experiences of people who had gotten lost in the forest. The notebook mentioned a strange phenomenon. People who entered the forest often found these clearings and abandoned structures only to get lost even deeper. Sarah was disturbed to discover that, apparently, the forest was not only a place of natural beauty, but also a place where people got lost for inexplicable reasons. The notebook also referred to a force that seemed to guide people into these clearings and keep them trapped. With the notebook in hand, Sarah decided she needed to act quickly. The radio could be her chance to call for help, but it was out of power. She decided to look for more information and tools inside the hut that could help her get out of the forest or better understand what was happening. However, an unsettling feeling that something was approaching made her speed up her movements as the surrounding forest seemed to close in on her. Sarah felt that the forest was becoming a living entity, guiding and manipulating her journey. With the notebook and the information she had found, she knew she had to find a way to escape before the forest consumed her completely. A sense of urgency did not leave Sarah as she searched the cabin for any resource that might help her escape the forest. The notebook she had found contained disturbing information about disappearances and strange natural phenomena, but it also included some tips that could be useful for getting out of the place. With the radio out of action and the light fading fast, Sarah decided she needed to explore what the forest had to offer. She found a toolbox and, using one of the flashlights she had found in the camping area, set to work repairing the radio. The hope of being able to communicate with the outside world was her only anchor of sanity. As she worked, Sarah noticed something curious on the wall of the hut, a series of strange marks and symbols that seemed to have been engraved with a sharp object. These symbols were similar to those found on the map she had studied. As she examined the signs, a feeling of déjà vu came over her, as if she had seen these symbols somewhere before. The radio finally emitted a hiss when Sarah managed to re-establish a connection. With a sigh of relief, she tried to contact the rescue station, but the response was only static and the echo of a distorted voice that she couldn't identify. The sound seemed to come from within the forest, which made her feel even more isolated and confused. Determined to understand more, Sarah left the cabin and ventured further into the forest. The idea that something was guiding her steps became clearer. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension, and the forest seemed to have a life of its own. Each time she found a new path, the feeling of being watched increased. She found a second clearing, similar to the first, but with one significant difference. In the center was an ancient altar, covered in melted candles and objects of worship. The altar seemed to have been used recently, and Sarah felt a wave of fear as she approached. Among the objects was a wooden box carved with intricate details. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the box and found a collection of strange objects and relics. There were a series of small vials, each containing a dark, thick liquid and a leather-bound book. The book was in an unknown language, but some words and phrases were legible, and they mentioned to guide and to stray from the path. As Sarah examined the altar and its items, she heard a voice again. This time, the voice seemed to be closer and was clearly calling her name. Sarah turned and saw a familiar figure among the trees, a woman in an old dress, her face still indistinct. It was the same figure she had seen earlier in the clearing. The figure approached slowly, and Sarah realized that she was being guided towards something. Fear mixed with curiosity as she followed the figure, which seemed to be moving with a clear intention. With each step, the feeling of disorientation lessened a little, as if the figure was helping her to find her way. The figure led Sarah to a small cave hidden among the roots of a giant tree. The inside of the cave was dark and damp, but there was an opening in the ceiling that let in a faint light. In the center of the cave was an ancient stone, covered in inscriptions similar to those she had seen in the hut and on the map. Sarah approached the stone and began to examine the inscriptions. As she touched the markings, she felt a cold, disturbing energy, and images began to move before her eyes, as if the stone were projecting visions of the past. She saw images of people being led into the forest and performing ancient rituals. The visions showed the forest as a living entity, manipulating events to keep the travelers trapped. The figure of the woman appeared again, now clearer and with a sad look on her face. She seemed to be trying to communicate something important to Sarah. The figure's voice, although inaudible, seemed to be trying to warn her about the nature of the forest and how to escape. Suddenly, the cave began to shake, and the figure disappeared. The stone began to glow with an intense light, and Sarah found herself being enveloped by an invisible force. The ground beneath her seemed to move, and the cave was closing in, as if the forest was trying to keep its secret. With an impulse of desperation, Sarah ran out of the cave, guided by an intuition that the only chance of escape was to follow the path revealed by the vision. The forest seemed to be opening up as she ran, and the trees moved aside as if they were allowing her to pass. Sarah managed to find a path that seemed clearer and more familiar. The feeling of being watched began to fade, and the light of dawn was in sight. With renewed hope, she pushed on along the trail, determined to escape the forest and reveal the mystery that had been hidden for so long. The light of dawn filtered softly through the trees, bringing a new sense of hope to Sarah. After her disturbing experience in the cave and the revelation that the forest had a life of its own and a force that manipulated travelers, she was determined to find the way out, no matter the cost. She followed the trail she had found, which seemed clearer and promised to lead out of the forest. The feeling of being watched had subsided, but Sarah still kept a constant watch, aware that the forest could change at any moment. The trail began to become wider and more visible as she advanced. Sarah felt increasingly hopeful, believing that she was getting closer to the exit. The birdsong and the sound of the wind in the trees were becoming clearer, as if the forest was trying to guide her out. However, as she approached a new clearing, Sarah noticed something strange. The clearing was littered with abandoned items, backpacks, clothes, and even a pair of shoes. all in a state of advanced deterioration. In the center of the clearing, there was a large fallen tree, covered in a thick layer of moss. Sarah approached the tree and began to investigate the items left behind. Among the things, she found a diary, similar to the one she had seen before, but this one was in a much better condition. The diary looked like it belonged to someone who had tried to escape from the forest, and its pages were full of detailed notes and sketches. Leafing through the pages, Sarah read about the experience of a person who had gotten lost in the forest and had found a path that seemed to promise the way out, but which ended up leading into a trap. The notes mentioned an alternative path and a climax of the experience, suggesting that there was a specific point where the forest became more difficult to traverse. The sense of urgency returned when Sarah realized that she needed to find this specific point to ensure her exit. She continued her walk, now with a new determination. The clearing and the abandoned items seemed a grim reminder that the forest did not allow anyone to leave easily. The trail began to climb, and Sarah found herself on steeper, rockier ground. The vegetation was sparser, and the sight of a more open sky brought new hope. However, as she climbed, the feeling that something was wrong returned to plague her thoughts. The forest seemed to be changing around her, with trees moving and the vegetation becoming denser at certain points. When Sarah reached the top of the rise, she spotted a structure in the distance. It was a small stone building, similar to an observation tower or an old control point. She approached cautiously, aware that it could be a trap. On entering the structure, Sarah found a surprisingly well-preserved environment. There was a table with maps, observation equipment, and a large log book. The book was open to a page showing a list of coordinates and descriptions of landmarks in the forest. She flipped through the book and found a note about an exit point that could be reached by following a specific trail. The coordinates seemed to point to a place outside the forest, and Sarah recognized that these coordinates coincided with an opening area she had spotted earlier. With renewed determination, Sarah picked up the maps and decided to follow the trail described in the book. As she approached the exit, the forest seemed to become less oppressive and more open. She was aware that there might still be challenges ahead, but the prospect of finally escaping was a relief. Finally, following the coordinates and the trail described, Sarah spotted a clear area and a road in the distance. The road seemed to be a connection to the outside world, and the sight brought tears to her eyes. She ran towards the road, screaming for help. When she reached the road, Sarah found a group of people and rescue vehicles who were looking for her. They welcomed her with relief and concern, and Sarah, exhausted but relieved, was taken to safety. While being attended to by rescue workers and receiving medical care, Sarah reflected on the terrifying experience she had lived through. The forest, with its mysterious and manipulative forces, had tested her limits and her courage. Although she was now safe, the memory of the forest and the events that took place there would continue to haunt her for a long time. Sarah knew that although the forest had been a nightmare, it had also taught her about the inner strength and determination needed to face seemingly insurmountable challenges. With a mixture of relief and sadness, she prepared to leave that chapter of her life behind and start on a new path, with the hope that her experiences would make her stronger and better prepared to face the future. The sense of security Sarah felt on the road was far from a complete relief. Although the rescue and medical care brought immediate relief, the experiences in the forest continued to haunt her thoughts. The disturbing images of the forest and the visions of the woman's figure seemed to be ever present in her mind, like echoes of a nightmare that refused to go away. After being discharged and returning to the city, Sarah tried to resume her normal life, but normality seemed strange and uncomfortable. The city was full of noises and routines that contrasted sharply with the oppressive silence of the forest. She was tired, both physically and mentally, and her nights were plagued by nightmares about the forest and the events that took place there. One day, while going through her things to organize the mess caused by the experience, Sarah found the diary she had found in the cabin. The book was covered in dust and looked almost like a relic. She decided to read it again, hoping to better understand what had happened and perhaps find some way to close this disturbing chapter in her life. As she read through the diary, Sarah found additional details about the disappearances in the forest. There was a section on the echoes of the past, mentioning how the souls of the people who had been lost there continued to wander, trying to communicate with those who entered the forest. The diary also talked about an intersection point, a place where realities intersected and where lost souls could interact with the living. The text seemed to suggest that by leaving the forest, Sarah had inadvertently become a part of this network of echoes, and that her presence was now intertwined with the forest itself. The diary mentioned that those who went through such intense experiences could feel the echoes of lost souls and occasionally be drawn back to the place. These discoveries left Sarah with an uneasy feeling. She decided that she needed to understand more about what was going on so that she could finally find peace. With the diary in hand, she sought help from experts in paranormal phenomena and local investigators who could offer a deeper insight into what she had experienced. After some research, Sarah discovered that the forest had an ancient history of disturbing events and strange rituals dating back centuries. The area where the forest was located was known to be a place of ancient cults and esoteric practices. The combination of legends and historical events seemed to confirm that the forest had a supernatural influence that could not be easily explained. Determined to find answers, Sarah decided to make another trip to the forest, accompanied by a team of experts who could help investigate the place and unravel the mysteries she had faced. Returning to the forest was a terrifying challenge, but she had to face her fears in order to find peace. With the team equipped with modern technology and devices to record any unusual activity, Sarah and the experts entered the forest again. The environment seemed almost the same, but now there was a different feeling, as if the place was waiting for them to arrive. They followed the trail and arrived at the clearing with the ancient altar. Using measuring and analysis equipment, they began to investigate the places mentioned in the diary. As they worked, they began to record anomalies and unexplained phenomena, sudden changes in temperature, indecipherable whispers and patterns of light that could not be explained. Sarah, observing the evidence and trying to make sense of it all, felt a growing connection with the forest. It was as if the lost souls were trying to communicate something to her, something she didn't yet fully understand. The feeling of being in touch with something beyond the physical world grew as they delved deeper into the investigation. At the end of the day, the team took a break to review the data and rest. Sarah, alone for a moment, sat on one of the stones around the altar and reflected on her journey. She closed her eyes and, in a moment of introspection, tried to connect with the feeling of despair and sadness she had felt in the forest. It was then that she heard a clear but soft voice calling her name. The voice seemed to be a mixture of many voices, intertwined in a collective lament. Sarah tried to focus on the voice, and for the first time, felt a sense of understanding and empathy with the lost souls. It was as if they were finally trying to communicate in a way that could be understood. With a new perspective, Sarah decided that her goal was not only to escape the forest, but also to help give a voice to the lost souls and bring to light the mysteries that had been hidden for so long. Her journey was far from over, but now she had a new mission: to seek truth and understanding, not only for herself, but for those who had failed to find their way back. The return to the forest was now a starting point for a new phase in her life, a search for answers and an attempt to find peace for the lost souls who still wandered in the darkness. Sarah's second foray into the forest brought a new purpose: to help understand the mysteries surrounding her and find a way to bring peace to the lost souls. The team of experts was equipped with high-tech tools, but Sarah knew that the answer to the forest's riddle could also be linked to something deeper and more spiritual. The group decided to concentrate on the clearing with the ancient altar, where the anomalies had been most evident. As the sun began to set and the light of dusk enveloped the forest, the atmosphere became even more charged and mysterious. The darkness brought a sense of urgency and expectation. While the team prepared their equipment and took measurements, Sarah paused to reflect on the visions she had experienced. The voice of the lost souls still echoed in her mind, and she felt she needed to do more to connect with these entities and understand their message. Sarah moved away a little and found a quiet spot near the clearing. Sitting on a rock, she closed her eyes and concentrated on her sensations, trying to establish a deeper connection. The darkness around her seemed to intensify, and a gentle breeze passed through, as if the forest itself was breathing with her. While meditating, Sarah had a clear vision. She saw images of the figures that had appeared earlier, now in a more defined form. The figures were people who seemed to be performing ancient rituals in an attempt to communicate with forces beyond the physical world. The visions showed how these rituals were done to try to maintain control over the forces of the forest, but they also revealed how these same rituals ended up trapping lost souls in an endless cycle. The vision also showed a specific place within the forest where a final ritual had been performed, a point where the veil between the worlds was thinner and where souls could be released. The spot was marked by an ancient symbol carved into a rock, which seemed to have a soft glow as the vision unfolded. With this new understanding, Sarah returned to the clearing and shared her findings with the team. They agreed to follow the trail and search for the location described in the vision. Using the maps and coordinates they had previously collected, they set off for the specific spot Sarah had seen. The journey to the indicated location was long and full of challenges. The forest seemed to be closing in and changing around them, as if trying to impede their progress. The team faced several difficulties, including blocked paths and sudden changes in vegetation. Finally, after hours of walking, they reached an area that matched the description of Sarah's vision. In the center, they found a large rock covered in an ancient symbol, which glowed faintly with an ethereal light. The surrounding area had a palpable sense of reverence and ancient energy. Sarah approached the rock and began to examine the symbol. She realized that the symbol was similar to those she had found elsewhere in the forest, but now it was more clearly defined and radiated a sense of calm and tranquility. She and the team prepared a ritual based on the practices described in the diary and the visions Sarah had seen. The aim was to perform a ceremony of liberation to help the lost souls find peace and, at the same time, close the disturbing cycle that kept the forest in a state of turmoil. While the ceremony was taking place, the surrounding environment seemed to change. The feeling of oppression and tension subsided, and the forest seemed to relax, as if relieved by the ritual that was being performed. The lost souls, who had been disturbing and unsettling, seemed to finally be finding a path to freedom. As the ritual drew to a close, Sarah felt a wave of peace and tranquility. The feeling of being connected to something greater and deeper brought a final understanding of the forest and its secrets. The cycle of turmoil and suffering seemed to have been broken, and the forest was now in a calmer, more balanced state. With the ceremony over, Sarah and the team returned to the city, feeling that they had accomplished an important mission. Although the forest still carried its stories and mysteries, the weight of the events that had taken place seemed to have been lifted. Sarah could now finally begin to close this disturbing chapter in her life. The experience had been profoundly transformative and had revealed an inner strength she hadn't known she possessed. She knew that the road to recovery would not be immediate, but in time, she hoped to find a new form of peace and balance. As she left the forest behind, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons she had learned and for the souls that were now at peace. She was ready to move on, taking with her the wisdom and strength she had acquired through her journey through the shadows of the forest. With the release ceremony completed and the forest finally in a more balanced state, Sarah hoped that the experience would be a closed chapter in her life. However, the changes in her perception and the experiences she had lived through left deep scars, and she couldn't help but let the echoes of the forest continue to influence her thoughts and feelings. Life slowly returned to normal for Sarah, but the experience had transformed her. She had become more introspective and cautious, and disturbing dreams continued to haunt her, recalling the events in the forest. Although there was a sense of relief, a part of her felt that there was more to be discovered, more truths to be revealed. As she reviewed her notes and the old diary she had brought back from the forest, Sarah began to notice patterns and additional information that she had previously overlooked. The diary contained descriptions of ancient rituals and the origin of the symbols found, suggesting that the forest had a much more complex history than she had imagined. Sarah decided to look for more information about the rituals and symbols that had been used in the forest. Her research led her to libraries and historical archives, where she found documents about ancient cults and esoteric practices dating back centuries. These documents revealed that the forest was considered a place of great power and mystery, used by various cultures throughout the ages for rituals of worship and communication with the afterlife. The study of these practices revealed a pattern of behavior that associated the forest with a continuous cycle of worship and sacrifice, where rituals were performed to maintain a balance between spiritual and physical forces. The most disturbing information Sarah found was about an ancient guardian of the forest, an entity that seemed to control and manipulate the energies of the forest. The guardian was described as a powerful and capricious force which could alternate between benevolent and hostile, depending on the actions of the human beings who entered its domain. The guardian's presence explained the sudden changes and the feeling of being watched that Sarah and her team had experienced. Determined to better understand this entity and its intentions, Sarah decided to make one last visit to the forest with a renewed purpose: to find and confront the guardian and understand its role in the cycle of rituals and unrest. She prepared a new expedition with the help of specialists and researchers who had experience in esoteric phenomena and spiritual entities. With advanced equipment and a new approach more focused on understanding the invisible forces of the forest, the team returned to the site. Upon entering the forest, Sarah sensed a change in the atmosphere. The forest was calmer than before, but there was an underlying sense of vigilance. The team headed towards the spot where the altar and symbol had been found, believing that the guardian might be associated with this area. As they explored the clearing, the atmosphere began to change. The air seemed to vibrate with a subtle energy, and signs of a spiritual presence became more evident. The team began to record unusual phenomena, such as abrupt variations in temperature and changes in luminosity. Suddenly, a figure began to materialize among the trees. It was an imposing, ethereal presence, enveloped in an aura of light and shadows. The figure seemed to be a manifestation of the guardian of the forest, and its presence was both fascinating and terrifying. Sarah, with a mixture of courage and apprehension, approached the figure. She realized that the guardian didn't seem to have hostile intentions, but rather a need to communicate. The figure seemed to want to convey a message, and Sarah tried to connect with the entity in a peaceful and respectful way. Through non-verbal communication and intuitive sensations, the guardian revealed that its function was to maintain the balance and protect the secrets of the forest. The unrest and disappearances had been a reaction to the imbalance caused by ancient rituals and the intrusive presence of people. The guardian also explained that the recent liberation ceremony had been an important step towards restoring harmony, but that there was still much to be done to ensure that the balance was maintained. The entity expressed a wish that Sarah and the others would respect the forest and share the knowledge they had acquired in a way that would help protect the environment and its energies. With this revelation, Sarah and her team promised to be guardians of the knowledge and to respect the boundaries of the forest. The visit to the Guardian brought symbolic closure to the experience, and the feeling of understanding helped to lighten the emotional load Sarah was carrying. Leaving the forest for the last time, Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and peace. She knew that the forest would continue to be a place of mystery and power, but now she had a new perspective on her role and the importance of respecting its energies. The return to everyday life was a journey of adaptation and reflection. Sarah found a new purpose in sharing her experiences and educating others about the importance of respecting sacred places and the mysteries of the world. Although the echoes of the forest still accompanied her, she now saw them as reminders of a profound and transformative journey. With a new understanding of herself and the world around her, Sarah was ready to move on, taking with her the lessons and wisdom acquired during her experience in the forest. She had found a balance between fear and understanding and was prepared to face any future challenge with courage and serenity. The return to everyday life brought a new rhythm for Sarah. The experience in the forest had left deep scars, but it had also endowed her with a deeper understanding and renewed inner strength. The sense of peace that now accompanied her was a constant reminder of the journey she had faced and the lessons she had learned. Over time, Sarah began to share her story at conferences and lectures, using her experience to educate others about the importance of respecting sacred places and the need to understand the mysteries surrounding the spiritual world. She found a way to turn her trauma into something positive, helping others to connect with nature and explore the unknown in a respectful way. Sarah wrote a book about her experience in the forest, detailing the discoveries she made, the challenges she faced, and the revelations she had. The book not only described the events that took place, but also offered insights into the importance of spiritual connection and respect for forces that we often don't fully understand. The publication of the book brought a flood of interest and support from people who were intrigued and touched by the story. Sarah was invited to radio shows, podcast interviews, and documentaries where she shared her journey and the importance of a careful approach when exploring the spiritual world. Despite her growing success, Sarah never lost sight of the need for self-care and reflection. She continued to visit the forest periodically, not to look for answers, but to reconnect with the place that had become part of her life. Each visit was an opportunity to meditate, reflect, and maintain the balance she had found. During one of these visits, Sarah noticed a change in the forest. Although there was still a sense of mystery, the atmosphere seemed more welcoming and serene. The trees, which had previously seemed oppressive and imposing, now seemed to offer a sense of protection and security. It was as if the forest was responding to the respect and understanding that Sarah had shown it. One quiet afternoon, while exploring a new part of the forest, Sarah found a small natural temple hidden among the trees. It was a simple structure made of stones and covered in moss, which looked as if it had been built a long time ago. In the center of the temple was a small fountain of crystalline water, whose waters sparkled with a soft light. Sarah felt a deep sense of peace and connection when she found the temple. It was as if the place was a silent tribute to the balance that had been restored and to the mutual respect between humans and nature. She knelt by the fountain and offered a moment of gratitude, recognizing the importance of the harmony that had been achieved. As the sun set and the forest began to sink into darkness, Sarah made one last reflection on her journey. She knew that the forest and her experiences had profoundly shaped who she was, and that the lessons she had learned would accompany her throughout her life. Leaving the forest for the last time, Sarah felt a new sense of closure and accomplishment. She had faced her fears, understood the invisible forces that governed the place, and finally found a balance between respect for the mystery and the ability to move on. Sarah's new journey was not only about overcoming the past, but also about embracing the future with a new perspective. She was ready to continue her life with an open heart and a clear mind, taking with her the wisdom she had acquired and the certainty that whatever the challenges ahead, she had the strength and understanding to face them. With a mixture of gratitude and hope, Sarah headed for the future, ready for new adventures and challenges, certain that the experience in the forest had been a transformative chapter in her life. The forest, with all its mysteries and lessons, would always be part of her, but now it was a part of her past, as she moved on to a new and promising future. Months passed since Sarah's return from the forest, and life took its course with a rhythm that seemed calmer and more centered. The intense and life-changing experience had left an indelible mark, but it had also given her a new perspective on the world and on herself. She continued to share her story and educate others about the importance of respecting and understanding the invisible forces and mysteries of nature. Sarah often visited the forest, no longer with a sense of apprehension, but with renewed respect and a desire to maintain the harmony she had helped to restore. Each visit was an opportunity to reflect, meditate, and reconnect with the place that had been so fundamental to her personal journey. The book he wrote about his experience was well received and helped many people to better understand the importance of connecting with the spiritual world in a respectful and informed way. The talks and conferences she led allowed her to share not only her story, but also the message that often the most challenging experiences can lead to greater understanding and personal growth. One morning, Sarah received a letter from a reader of her book who had been deeply touched by her story. The reader, a young man who had faced his own spiritual challenges, expressed his gratitude for having found a message of hope and understanding. The letter talked about how Sarah's journey had inspired the young man to seek his own inner peace and to face his fears with courage and determination. The letter brought a new sense of purpose to Sarah. She realized that the influence of her story was spreading and helping others to find their way, just as she had found hers. This connection with others brought a sense of fulfillment and peace, knowing that her experience had served a greater purpose. On a quiet evening, Sarah returned to the natural temple she had found earlier in the forest. The temple, with its simplicity and serenity, remained a special place for her. Sitting by the fountain, she reflected on the journey she had been on and the impact it had had. The water in the fountain sparkled under the soft glow of the setting sun, and the surrounding forest seemed to breathe with a sense of calm and harmony. Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything she had learned and experienced. She knew that the forest, with all its mysteries and strengths, had been a crucial part of her transformation and her understanding of the spiritual world. As she prepared to leave the temple and return to her daily life, Sarah did one last meditation. She visualized a stream of light flowing through the forest, connecting the places she had visited and the souls she had helped. It was a symbolic representation of the restoration of balance and harmony that now permeated the place. Ye